There was a code that was originally put in place because most of the movies that were made in the 1920s were just obscene. It was either pornography or it was just bad. Eventually, it collapsed.
What were the contents of this code?
People start going, well, there's no point in me making the X-rated movies anymore. I do have my criticisms of the original code. If the conclusion is, well, life sucks and then you die when you come out of a movie, well, you've just watched a terrible movie. But if you come out of the movie with the conclusion that there are things that are worth fighting for and heroism is to be pursued and admired, then that's a good movie that you've just walked away from. And most of the time, unless it's really, really bad, you don't know whether or not you're in a good movie until you finished it. Because the last 10 minutes of a movie is what really makes or breaks it. And my absolute favorite movie of all time.
What are we drinking tonight, Ethan?
Water. I am out of everything alcoholic that I have in my house, and I didn't go and buy anything. I forgot to, so.
Oh, well. Water's a worthy drink. It is not of note, and yet it is.
My liver will appreciate it.
Fair enough.
And what do you have?
Well, my liver will not appreciate me. I am back to the Scotch this evening. The Grangerstone, whatever. I can't even remember at this point. I'd have to go back downstairs and look at the can, and I'm not going to. So, the same one I got for the wedding I went to this summer, where I was the best man.
Very nice.
So, excellent stuff.
Scotch is hard to beat.
This is true. And there's something fine about it and something artistic about it, which fits with the theme of films, which you wanted to talk about this evening.
Yeah, I think it's just because, in the postpartum period, you wind up resting a lot. At least my wife winds up resting a lot. So we've wound up just watching a lot of movies together lately. And especially over the past couple of weeks. And sometimes when I'm watching a film, I have these ideas about film in general or about this film in particular that I want to lay out and talk about. And I think the podcast is probably a good place to do it.
Well, you are much better at doing so than me, because I am one of those people that just never watches films. Like, I am the guy that you're most likely to talk to. It's just like, have you seen that film? No. Have you seen that film? No. What films have you seen? Some, but this is a theme, people.
It's kind of infrequently that I watch a new film, one that I haven't seen before. Only because, the experience of watching a bad film leaves a bad taste in your mouth, and you're like, I don't really want to gamble and lose 2.5 hours of my life on something that's just going to be nonsense.
That's true. There's plenty of those films these days. Although, shame to say, I'm also the type of person who does not require a high quality plot to enjoy the film. It just seems to be how I am.
There's different standards for what a high quality plot actually is. And some people set their standards way too high. Other people set their standards way too low. Like, usually my standard for a plot is if I have enough questions answered by the end of the movie, it's a good movie.
Okay.
And usually my big issue is I have big issues with plot holes. So, why can't you... it's been established that this person can do this, so why doesn't he do this in this situation? That would probably actually just fix everything.
Mm-hmm.
Or that would have prevented all these other things from happening. And that's one of those, well, the entire plot has plot armor.
If the only logical reason is the writers made me do it, then that is a knock.
Yes.
No matter whether you're talking about films or books or whatever.
Film, it's films, contrived. Literature. It should be something that flows naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And it shouldn't be a, well, if we do that, then the movie will be over too quickly, so write something else.
Which I guess flows into a good question to kind of start us off, which is just, yeah, what makes a good film? Or how ought I to think about film in a way that lends me towards seeking out good films?
Well,
You know,
film isn't.
especially if you're the normal type of person who's just like, okay, I need something to do for entertainment this evening, so I'm gonna go watch a movie that I kind of like. Like that's fine in a sense, but
Well,
I don't know.
first things first,
Call me
we've
out of that to something higher.
well, like we've discussed, film is a can be a form of art, and it is a medium which ought to be used to make art. So it should elevate the mind and soul, uh, and it should be true, good, and beautiful, which is what all art should be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is why the so-called art films are mostly garbage, because it's usually just nonsense flashing across the screen. Like there's no story, there's no development, there's nothing unfolding for you to watch, which is really why we come to film. It's the same reason we come to novels. This is kind of not talking about documentary, and documentary kind of tends to get ignored as far as film goes, uh, even though documentary is important. So documentary is to film just what nonfiction is to literature. So we do actually need that as well, and there are very good documentaries, but they're just not most people's cup of tea when they're just going to sit down and watch a movie. You know, you want to sit down and watch a movie, and you have the option to watch like Gods and Generals or Ken Burns' Civil War documentary. I'd say at least 8 out of 10 people will say, "Hey, let's watch Gods and Generals." It's a slow-paced movie, but you're actually watching it unfold in a film that's based on a novel that's written by a historian that studied the first half of the Civil War, or the Civil War leading up to the death of Stonewall Jackson. But anyway, so that's what I have to say
Yes.
about documentary. I won't be talking a whole lot about. I'm going to be leaving documentary out of the conversation strictly because I don't watch a lot of documentaries, so I don't have a lot to say about them other than the fact that yes, I think the fact that they exist is a good thing because they are just like nonfiction but for film. But they're just not something that I usually would watch just for entertainment purposes.
Okay. Maybe this is an ironic question for me to ask, considering that in the last episode I just defined art as anything that was good, true, and beautiful. But when you say that films have to be good, true, and beautiful, um, unpack that a bit in a practical sense. Like, what should we be looking for in the makeup of the film and its various elements that lends itself to that?
Visual, being visually appealing, having a cohesive story, and a proper moral or actual. I don't like using these words, but I can't think of others. Like takeaways from the movie, something that it has gotten you to think about, something that it actually has elevated you to. And this can come in any form in any genre of film. Uh, like there's a lot of romantic comedies where it's like, all right, yes, this is how a man ought to behave in this situation. This is how a woman ought to, and this is how a man and woman ought not to behave in this situation. Or there are like horror movies where it's like, okay, this is something I shouldn't be afraid of, and yeah, there are some things that I definitely ought to be afraid of. You know, there's something to elevate yourself, take you out of yourself, and think of things that are higher. That's the only way that I can think of to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
And making them true and good and beautiful. Truth, they should reflect something about the human condition, which is another phrase that I hate, but it gets tossed around. It's the only one I can think of. Basically, it should reflect something about yourself and make you either learn something about yourself, realize something about yourself, or about man in general, man in the world in general.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and you should come away from it in a positive way. Like you should come away from it with a positive, not really feeling, but a positive sense.
Mm-hmm.
that you have actually come to a good conclusion. Because if, the conclusion is, well, life sucks and then you die when you come out of a movie, well, you've just watched a terrible movie. But if you have come out of the movie with the conclusion that there are things that are worth fighting for and heroism is to be pursued and admired, then that's also then that's a good movie that you've just walked away from.
Well said.
And most of the time, unless it's really, really bad, you don't know whether or not you're in a good movie until you finished it. Because the last 10 minutes of a movie is what really makes or breaks it. And I think the movie that's in my head right now that I'll use as an example of this is Dead Poet Society, which, pretentious assholes like to say is like such a masterwork and fantastic movie. Uh, it's good until the last 10 minutes when you think you need to get your point across by having a 16-year-old kid shoot himself in the head because his dad doesn't want him to be an actor.
Hmm.
I understand the point that you're trying to make there, but I can rewrite that movie, the last 10 minutes of that movie, in a couple of minutes and make it 100 times better. Because the whole movie is about how, Robin Williams' character is a very good teacher and he inspires these boys to study poetry and to study film and to study plays and to participate in the arts at this school that basically is only letting him. He's their token English teacher because this school is very prestigious and produces like doctors and lawyers and scientists and whatever. So it's and being set in the 50s is a good choice too because that's kind of where the culture was at the time was like, no, you need to be a doctor, you need to be a lawyer, you need to be a nuclear scientist because that's where the money's at. You're going to make a good living that way, and that's where society is going. We're going to leave art behind us, and we're just going to be focusing on science and progress. So yes, that's there, but ultimately you watch that movie and your takeaway is, well, this 16-year-old kid just shot himself in the head because he couldn't deal with his dad not wanting him to be an actor, and this dad is got this crappy father that's just browbeating him into becoming a doctor when he doesn't really want to be a doctor, although he never really talks to his dad about it except maybe once in the whole film about how he doesn't really want to be a doctor, he wants to be an actor, he wants to do other things. And I will rewrite the last 10 minutes of that movie for you right here. For one thing, the play that the kid was secretly taking part in, it should not have been Midsummer Night's Dream. It's a funny play, but it's one of Shakespeare's worst. It ending with Puck just basically complaining about how he's cleaning up after everybody else. Don't use that. Because his dad shows up at the very end and then berates him for being in the play, even though his performance as Puck was great. What it should have been, instead of Midsummer Night's Dream, it should have been something like Hamlet or Henry V, where he has the starring role. Actually, Hamlet would have been the best way to convey the message that they want to do, because if the dad shows up at the right time to see his son perform, then he can see his son deliver Hamlet's famous soliloquy. To be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, yada, yada, yada. And then, watching his son kill himself on stage and then come to that realization himself that I am the one hurling the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune on my son. And then after the performance, come to his son in tears and say, I am proud of you. I was wrong. That was a spectacular performance. You should be an actor. Study English, study writing, be an actor. And then let the movie end there. But no, they have to do this is what the 50s was like, because this is what dads are like. The dad just browbeats him to the point where he just shoots himself in the head because he wants to be who he is, and the dad's not letting him. And then the parents have to lay all of the blame on Robin Williams because he was a bad teacher for filling his head with false dreams. and the teacher is the one that's responsible, and the teacher gets fired, but the kids all think he's better than their own parents, so they wind up showing more respect to him than anybody else at the end of the movie. And Robin Williams did nothing wrong.
No, it's not his fault.
His
It's
character does nothing wrong through that entire movie. But your teacher should not be replacing your father. It's not what he's there for. He did his job correctly, but in the minds of viewers, it's basically they're trying to get in the minds of these boys in the movie. It's like he has replaced their fathers because their dads are all pushing them to be doctors and lawyers and whatever, and he's saying it's okay to be something else.
I mean, it's fundamentally just not a good plot. It doesn't leave you fulfilled. It doesn't leave you
Yeah,
aspiring to anything. It doesn't leave you called up to something higher.
but I
It
just fixed it.
Well, you just fixed it, but
The way I just fixed it, it would have called you to something higher. It
it would have
would
been
have left you
beautiful.
fulfilled.
Absolutely.
That would have
Yeah.
been great.
Definition of a missed opportunity. So when you're talking about that too, um, and the definition kind of lead. Well, when you're talking about that film, one of the things that reminded me of one of the films I have seen was John Wick. So I watched it at your house sometime in the past year or
Mm,
whenever, and when I watched that, I mean, everybody says it's a great film, right?
mm-hmm.
Action's great. Writing is pretty darn good, if not better, probably. I'd have to watch it again to give a fair impression of it. But the overall story is purely a revenge story. And I didn't care about it really as much. The only redeeming thing I could come up with for that, which doesn't fully work, is, oh, it's a setup for later movies. And it's like, fair enough. But still, on its own right, the movie is just a revenge story that's just really well shot. Again, great action. But there's something missing from that, which speaks to what you're getting at with the definition of what a good film is.
There is, and you can sort of feel something missing from all of those four movies, uh, despite how spectacularly they're shot and how well the action is done. There is
Mm-hmm.
something that's missing there. But my dad and I have talked about them at length as well, and I actually think that they're almost good movies in the sense that we're just talking about,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you take all four of them as a whole, because the overall point is actions have consequences. Like the overall point that is made is that actions have consequences. Like this punk kid who thinks he's invincible, he beats a random guy up and kills the dog and steals the car. Well, you don't know whose dog you just killed and whose car you just stole.
Mm-hmm.
And just from his character's perspective, from the perspective of John Wick, it's he just lost his wife, who he thinks is the only good thing he has ever had. He thinks the only good thing in his life that he has ever done is marry that woman. And she has just died. Cancer has taken her, or some illness has taken her. It's not really ever clear. And she left him this puppy so he didn't have to be alone. So he would have a companion, which is also good.
Mm-hmm.
And then they come in and they take it from him. And now all that he is left with is his past, is the only thing that he actually knows how to do, which is kill. So basically, what they have done is come into the life of a man who is trying to be a good man after living a life of definitely not being a good man.
Mm-hmm.
And they basically have taken everything good away from him and forced him back into what he wanted to leave behind. And then the other three movies are basically just the chain reaction of what happens. Like, these are consequences. He makes a really big mistake at the end of the second movie that leads into the third movie.
True.
And it's satisfying to watch because the bad guy got his comeuppance there. But it's like, yeah, that was a huge mistake. And there are going to be consequences for that too. And if he hadn't done that, he might have gotten away and been left alone. but he couldn't because, again, the only thing he knows how to do is kill.
So you could say that there's a justice there that ought to be praised, but at the end of the day, and I can't properly judge the other films, I can only speak for the first one. It still is a case of of evil responding to evil. Same with Dead Poet Society. You know, dad doesn't treat his son right. So what does the son do? He offs himself. Okay, that's not no. Like for all the reasons we said, that's not a good way of looking at it. And what it also reminds me of is Flannery O'Connor stuff, like we talked about one or two
Mm.
podcasts ago. Like some people think of those as amazing works, and yet I don't know, are they? Like, did they accomplish the purpose that they were set out to accomplish? Did they actually call you to something greater? No, they scream the consequences of doing evil in your face, but I don't know. I'd rather have Lord of the Rings to scream the consequences of doing evil in my face in a different way, and also
Yeah, that
scream
almost is
what
like,
virtue does.
you can almost say, yeah, but Lord of the Rings to basically anything and
Fair.
end the conversation there because both the books and the films are masterpieces, which we'll get
Hopefully that
into.
gets at what I'm talking about, though.
Yeah, I understand what you're talking about. And yeah, there is.
Like here's another way of looking at that. Applying to the Flannery O'Connor example. If you were going to paint a great story, paint it into a film, metaphorically speaking, about one of the German officials who killed, or was part of the killing of hundreds of thousands of Jews during the Holocaust.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's something to be said to a movie about him ending with a scene in a courtroom where he gets justice because actions have consequences.
So that actually did happen. So
Yeah.
the uh the chief officer at Auschwitz, for at least the last part of the war, if it wasn't through the entirety of it, uh somehow managed to get away for a time, and he wound up actually converting, becoming a Catholic, repenting, going to confession, and then he turned himself in and was hung at Auschwitz.
That's a good example of where I was going. Let's pretend that you have a counterexample to that. Let's use a serial killer, or a not a serial killer, but just a hardened criminal who's killed a
Mm-hmm.
family. And he is hardened during the trial as they go through everything that they do in a trial. And at the end of it, um, the one survivor of the family, the mom, who's lost her husband and her three kids, just goes up to him and forgives him. And he doesn't like get away scot free. He gets thrown in jail and such, but that tears apart his soul
Uh huh.
in a good way, and actually gets him not like to repent on the spot, but like over time, repentance comes from that because of that single act of kindness.
See,
Who wouldn't rather watch that story than the Flannery O'Connor version?
where the
One
mom
is
just goes
way
completely
better than the
insane and
other.
shoots him in the head,
That or just he gets the
or he gets
justice that
away.
he just gets the justice that he deserves, and he goes to the electric chair and dies and doesn't repent, and that's that. Okay,
Well, the thing is that
what's
people
the
do
point?
go to the electric chair without repenting,
Mm-hmm.
and the forgiveness angle does need to be pursued cautiously,
Mm-hmm.
because yes, while it is technically the right thing to do, it should be understood when it is not the immediate reaction.
Yeah.
Should be understandable when it's not the immediate reaction. It takes a very, very particular kind of person to forgive in that manner. It takes an uncommonly good kind of person. And in that sense, if you're trying to portray an ideal for people to live up to, then by all means go for it. But if justice is what you're going for, because especially now, there are far too many movies that try to make their villain understandable or sympathetic.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say actually the better way to do that. So there's one of two ways. Either she does forgive him, or the villain has done something horrible, and he is forgiven by the hero. It goes either one of two ways, and it doesn't have to be like specifically. It doesn't have to be explicit where the hero literally says the words "I forgive you," uh, because rare is the case in which that is how it's meant to be portrayed.
Mm-hmm.
But it should be. There's two ways of going about it. Either the example that you gave, where the villain is forgiven, and it tears apart his soul, and he repents because of it, which has happened after Maria Goretti's mother forgave Alonzo. That's what happened. He spent a lot of time in prison, turned himself around, went up and became a monk, and now there's a cause for his canonization too, which I think he ought to be canonized. I think that would probably be one of the greatest canonizations of the modern age, when we can canonize a man who killed another saint. Um,
Yeah.
or even because Maria Goretti forgave him while she was dying, bleeding out from the 18 knife wounds that he gave her. So it's either the one that you said, or to illustrate that there just are evil men, and we can't just ignore the fact that there are evil men. Have him be forgiven, and then say, I don't care. Because there are people that reject forgiveness too. And the latter is something that almost never happens in film, very rarely. Whereas like there's one final point of the hero wanting to reason with the villain, and the villain would rather die.
True, but because the movie is still about the hero, you get away with it. So, in this, in scenario two that you're describing, is the villain actually the protagonist of the story,
No,
or is he
this is
the
the one where the
antagonist?
hero is the protagonist.
Okay.
You should have prefaced with the first scenario you're describing as one where the villain is the protagonist.
In both of mine, the villain is the protagonist, but because it's ultimately about him.
It all depends on the focus of the story. Typically,
Yeah.
more typically, the hero is the protagonist of the story.
Mm-hmm. Typically, yeah.
So I think we do need more stories like the one that you're describing, but that's.
Yeah. And the examples you gave are really good too, to be fair. But
Yeah.
ultimately, it just is further illustrating the point of a movie should call you up and into something. And to a degree, its quality is going to be determined by how well it calls you up into that thing and what it is,
Yes.
you know? Hence why a even if there's something good in John Wick, actions have consequences. Okay, fine. That is something. Um, that does not compare with a number of other great films. It just doesn't.
Well, no, and I wasn't trying to say that it was on the same level as a number of other great films.
I know.
But I'm giving my interpretation of the film and why they are, in my opinion, still good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Particularly because, especially if you watch all four of them, it's not so much in the first one, but it becomes a lot more obvious in the second and beyond. In most of the scenes in the film, or most of the moments in the story when that are turning points or are like story defining moments, there is some religious iconography in the background. There is something Christian in the background. One point, there's a conversation happening on a terrace, and St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York is in the background. There is a conversation happening just like in a back room, and there's a crucifix in the background. And what I take out of that is, even for people who are wicked, like these are all wicked people, that's likable characters, because your characters have to be likable to make the movie interesting. They're all wicked people. I don't think anybody will really, not many people will disagree with that. They are technically wicked. They are still, God still watches them. And John Wick himself is can be protected and used as and basically used for the will of God, whether it's his active or his permissive will.
Hmm.
Because it basically, by the end of the fourth movie, what he has done is crippled the entire world's underground. Massively crippled the entire world's underground with just the number of bodies that he's piled up, some of the specific people that he's killed, and just the waves that he has made. And it's that sort of thing that sometimes the right man for the job is not a pillar of virtue. Sometimes it's a man that is a better man than he thinks he is, or was striving to be a better man than he had been.
Hmm.
Sometimes it takes a man like John Wick. But
Yeah, sometimes it does, like you said.
and those are situations in which it's like, yeah, this is a former mob hitman, basically, although he's way worse than that, leaving a trail of mob bodies. It's like nobody innocent is dying in these movies. And there are some people that you can sympathize with. And there are a couple of cases where he refuses to kill somebody. But it's like, yeah, there's nobody here that is morally without blame. Which is not to say that, like, oh yeah, just because the bad guys are getting killed, then that's totally fine. We can just completely lay waste to them because they're bad guys. It's not like these are guys that are just doing their jobs. Like, technically they are, but they also know the kind of work that they're in. And they know what kind of evil that they're cooperating in.
So I'll loosely jump from there to a different question. What are some of the ways that you see modern films these days generally fail our parameters that we've set forth for good films? And what are the common faults? I mean, some of them are obvious to listeners, perhaps, but just throw some out there.
Well, I would say anything that is obviously intended to start a franchise, obviously intended, like, I'm making this movie so I can then make more movies to make more money, that will ultimately fail because you're not at that point trying to create a work of art, you're trying to create a product. And as soon as you start thinking about your film as a product, you have made it worse. Because when it's a product, it's something that you have to sell. When it's a work of art, it's something that sells on its own merit. So,
Why can't it be both, though? Exhibit A, granted, this is not a film, this is a book trilogy, but let's just use the Mistborn trilogy or the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
again, because those aren't products, those are works of art. I don't have to be sold on the Mistborn trilogy. Granted, I have already read them, so I don't have to be sold on them again. But Brandon Sanderson did not write them so he would have a book to sell. He did
No,
not
this
write
makes
them.
sense.
He wrote them. He wanted to make his living as an author, but that's because he loves writing stories. He writes for the love of writing, and he makes his living at it. Which you should do a thing for the love of doing it and make your living at it. That's really how it should all be.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that Brandon Sanderson makes a killing at it.
Yeah,
And he's been doing it for
but no,
20 years.
your point makes sense. So, like, if it's purely for the money, then
You have made it empty. So you have taken the soul out of it, basically.
mm-hmm. No, it makes sense.
And you can tell when people write reviews for movies where they're like, this is obviously a soulless cash grab. That's sort of the more red pilled way of putting it. But so I think there are kind of four pillars to a good movie. That's writing, casting, performance, and direction. Which editing is part of direction. The
Sure.
So that kind of gets lumped into there, just so I have that covered in case people are like, well, you forgot to mention editing. That's part of direction.
We do not need to give credit to every single person in the credits. Thank you very much.
Yeah. It takes all four of these things to make a movie truly really great. A well-written story, everybody kind of knows what a well-written story is. At least most normal people know what a well-written story is. It seems obvious, but you do have to say this now. It should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it should kind of be clear. It should flow evenly, but it should also be clear when the movie is ending, or when everything is coming to a head, or when it is about to end. Or you should be able just to feel what part of the story you're in, rather than just be jolted from here to there, from here to there, from here to there. And another way I think that a film can sort of fail our parameters is when the director is full of himself. A lot of times because people have decided that he's great and glorious and amazing, and usually it's because like he did something really interesting early in his directorial career and people latch onto that. But in all this is to say that a movie is not good specifically because of who the star in the movie is and who the director of the movie was.
Yeah. He doesn't have to be full of himself, but you just can't judge like just because some fancy, some famous name director made something like that. I'll judge it off the quality of the work, not his name.
Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry, Goodfellas is not a good movie. You may think Scorsese is a master. I don't think it was a good movie. The only thing I was happy about that movie was that Mark Wahlberg came out of it alive.
okay.
It's the only thing I was happy about in the end of that movie. And Matt Damon got shot. That's like the only other thing that I was happy about.
Okay.
Not because it was Matt Damon getting shot. It was his character that it was like, okay,
Sure.
he got to come up. It's good.
If you can't tell, yet another movie I haven't watched. So,
Yeah, it's sometimes movies are good for a watch once for one reason or another. That's the case with most movies that are considered classics
mm-hmm.
or whatever. Now, I will
Yeah,
say
for
that
me, one of those movies is Shawshank Redemption. Like people say it's a great film, so I watched it at one point and just like, no, nah, it really ain't good. I can see why the writing can just good at different points. I can
yeah,
understand well enough why people think it's good, but eh,
it's one of those that's good for a single watch,
yeah,
but not like a oh, I kind of feel like I'm in the mood for a movie, but don't want to try something new. Let's watch Shawshank Redemption. No, that's not usually,
nope.
and it isn't purely out of entertainment value either. Now, that isn't to say that it's wrong to be inclined to go and see a movie because your favorite actor's in it or your favorite director happens to be directing it.
Hmm.
That's not wrong, but you should also go knowing, hoping that it's going to be good, that it's going to live up to the expectations that actor and director have set for you. But if it doesn't meet those expectations, then you should be okay with that. You shouldn't say and then just outright defend an obviously bad movie because of who was in it or who directed it. And that includes if it's 2.5 hours of pretentious nonsense, which is I'm gonna get hate for this. That's my opinion of most Christopher Nolan movies.
Okay.
I think they're heavy-handed and pretentious for the most part. The Dark Knight is an exception. Actually, his entire Batman trilogy is an exception. Uh, and The Dark Knight Rises is a better movie than people give it credit for. But I think for the most part, Christopher Nolan movies are heavy-handed and pretentious, and the same is true for Zack Snyder. Uh, and we'll get to that further on when we talk about adaptations and franchises. But yeah, I think For the most part, I'll say this: Christopher Nolan movies are mostly for people who think they're way smarter than they actually are.
What do you mean, though? I guess a movie that, as an example, that comes to my head is Inception. You know, that literally takes your mind on a journey. There's a tracking of things that happens, and then it leaves you with a twist at the end, which makes you question a number of things. Is that what you mean, or
Yeah, it's kind of the same. Academic is not the word that I'm trying to go for what it is not. And this could also just happen to be with just my view of storytelling in general. But I don't know that I can put it better than the way that I already did. And a lot of that is based on just my reaction to the Nolan fan dude bros who think that he's the greatest director who has ever lived and think that his work is the best. They're usually like their IQ is not that much above room temperature usually, because usually what Nolan is trying to get across in his movies is not that hard to grasp. But he does it in such a way that when you grasp it, or when you catch the twist at the end, uh, and I don't think he does this deliberately, but it's done in such a way that when slightly below average intelligence people see it and grasp it, they think they've come to some grand conclusion that nobody else has come to. That just could partially just be, again, because I'm a crotchety old man and I don't like the way that people talk about Christopher Nolan movies. Uh,
fair enough? Well, there's something to be said for being a crotchety old man, but my initial reaction is to view the irony of a 140 IQ guy who doesn't think matters, criticizing the IQ level of a movie as beneath him.
I didn't say that the IQ level of the movie was
No,
beneath me.
beneath you.
I didn't say that the IQ level of the movie was beneath me. I'm saying that people who aren't really all that bright think that they're way smarter than they actually are because they got a Christopher Nolan movie.
Hmm.
Because they understood something that was actually fairly obvious.
Okay, I see where you're going there.
That's what I'm objecting to. And I don't need a number to tell me when somebody is thinks he's way smarter than he actually is. I don't need to see an IQ test for that. And I'll reiterate, that's usually what the IQ test accomplishes, is making people think they're way smarter than they actually are, or
No,
way dumber than they actually are. It's one of those two things. Very infrequently does it actually genuinely reflect a person's potential in every single way. And I don't care what anybody says about that. That's where I'm planting my flag on that particular topic.
to all of our listeners, you're not allowed to object to us on this unless you watch our previous videos where we talk about IQ and like and subscribe. But fair enough. So, what are some examples of movies that meet these criteria? You know, that have a good story, that are well cast, that are well directed, that are well shot.
Well, so I sort of made this list. It's not a comprehensive list by any means, because there's a lot of movies, and a lot of them also get lumped into the next sort of section of our conversation. But when I'm looking at a film in general, one of the criteria that I think of it being just a really good film, and this I came up with this primarily just to help me narrow down what I think are my favorite, just my list of my all-time favorite movies. It pains me a little bit and it angers a lot of people for me to say this, but I immediately, one of the things that I do is cut out something that is based on pre-existing source material. And I don't mean
Okay.
something that's based on an idea that the guy got from somewhere, multiple ideas, because that's what all stories are, or from it being something that's based on history, because that would also kind of be ridiculous. So one of these doesn't really, it almost fails because of this. Uh, but I have a reason that I accept, that I made an exception for it.
Explain your logic behind that premise, though, where you discount the movies that are based on
Because at
pre-existing
that
source
point,
material.
because if you start with source material and say, "Hey, I'm going to make this into a movie," a lot of the work of the film has been done for you. The structure of the story is already there. The characters are already there and developed. You don't have to write the story beginning, middle, and end. You can just read the story beginning, middle, and end.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your interpretation of it can be different and can be good or bad. But I usually tend to discount movies that are based off of pre-existing source material, particularly books, because of that. Because at that point, it is like a good film should be a good film and nothing else. Like, the film should not be good because the book was good. Like, if the book is already really good, the film has a better chance of being good. You understand what I'm saying there?
It has
It's
a
like
better
you're trying.
it has a better chance, but we both know of a lot of examples of movies that aren't adapted well.
We do, but they're also not on my list.
Fair enough. But that means the potential for screwing it up is still there.
There is potential for screwing it up, and I'm not going to pretend that there isn't potential for screwing it up. But that's why I take, you know, movies that are based off of books out of the conversation. Also, because the Lord of the Rings trilogy would just win every time.
Why can't it?
Because it's the greatest story ever written, aside from the story of salvation.
Say you brought to
It is
mind
the greatest epic tale ever told, and thus adapted into film, it becomes the greatest film trilogy ever made. So it's more just a genuine handicap to keep the Lord of the Rings from winning every time.
or the Passion of the Christ.
That too. It's just genuine handicap to keep those things from constantly winning all the time.
Fair enough.
It makes the contest more fair for other films, is what I'm saying.
This will make it work for your personal rankings. We'll give it that.
Yes. So two films that go off of that meet these criteria that I think are just excellent films because of how they're told. And a lot of other historians are going to be mad at me because I use these films, but I don't care. I think they're good movies. I'm going to get to my opinion of historical films in a moment. Gladiator and The Last Samurai. Two fantastic early 2000s heroes' journeys and heroes' stories. Gladiator is technically a revenge story, but it is I think it's a different kind of revenge story. And it's more based off of the fact that I don't know the full story that it's supposed to be based on, but as far as I understand, it's kind of purely based on the fact that Emperor Commodus died in the Colosseum because he wanted to partake in the games and got himself killed. So they wrote this. So this entire movie was written based on that.
Yeah, I could work with that.
Also, because, an actor that I do genuinely like, particularly in the first decade of the 21st century, is Russell Crowe. I think he's just a fantastic actor, and I like seeing him in things. The Last Samurai is kind of for another reason, because you see this soldier that is just jaded, this jaded, drunken soldier find something that is actually worth fighting for, that he's willing to protect from something else.
Against
And
hopeless odds, too.
Yeah. Because that is kind of how the Battle of Shirayama did go. They put up a really good fight, but ultimately there were only 40 of them left. And they decided, well, we're not going to bring ourselves in, and we're just going to charge. We know it's hopeless and we know we're going to die, but what we're fighting for is worth fighting and dying for. Which I think is what that film should inspire in you. And Gladiator it's a different kind of revenge story because, yes, Maximus's purpose for his climb through the Colosseum, through the fight circuit, it's driven by his desire to kill Commodus for what he did. But ultimately he winds up picking up other things and adding on things that wind up either equaling or superseding vengeance as a reason for him to fight and kill Commodus. Like, I think at one point he even considers sparing Commodus briefly and turning it around another way. And
Yeah, I'm
ultimately, it's
conscious of.
Commodus that spells his own end by locking himself in an arena with the man that has vowed to kill him.
Yeah, it's hard to parse that out because, in one sense, I could compare that to John Wick for the reasons that we talked about. But on the other end, I know based off of common sense and just intuition, it's like, no, these things are not the same.
Yeah.
I can't put my finger on why, but they're not the same.
Because he also realizes that he's fighting to free the other gladiators. He is fighting for somebody else's freedom, which is why the song that plays during the credits that Enya sings is called Now We Are Free.
Great song too.
It is. And the Clamavide Profundis version is even better.
I need to listen to that now.
Oh, it's excellent. It's been out for a while. I think that's one of the first non religious songs that they did, but it's excellent.
If enough of y'all subscribe, and Clamavide Profundis decides to de-anonymize themselves, we should have them on.
Yeah, that would be great. Although
Be
keeping
awesome.
themselves anonymous is also still a good choice.
Yeah,
I won't demand that they de-anonymize themselves.
same.
So
But if they ever do, just saying, just saying, you got a couple massive fans right here. So
I also don't, by the same logic of me discounting things that are based on other things, that are based on pre-existing works, I don't discount sequels necessarily. I probably will have to discount remakes, even though there are some remakes that are just absolutely spectacular. Particularly if I haven't seen the original. I was going to say 310 to Yuma because that's a very, very good movie. The more recent one with Russell Crowe and Christian Bale. But, based on my previous criteria, that one is off of that list at least.
mm-hmm.
The top list. But things that do definitely belong on that list are most John Wayne movies. There are some that are based on previous works. Hondo is the one that comes specifically to mind because that's a Louis L'Amour novel. But I think there are three John Wayne movies, at least that I have seen, that would probably stand out to most people. Well, two of them will. One of them might not. Because even though I think it's the greatest movie ever made of all time, period, full stop, there's a surprising number of people that had never seen it or even heard of it. Uh, so one of these that I think everybody has heard of is The Searchers. This is a John Wayne film directed by John Ford, and it was considered by John Wayne himself to be the greatest film he ever starred in.
Before you launch into why, I'll represent the masses and say I've never heard of the Searchers before tonight. But
Again,
perhaps shame
maybe
on
also
us.
because inside I'm at least 3 times of my actual age. But The Searchers, which is also in a sense a revenge story, but doesn't completely end with vengeance. And John Wayne considered it to be it was his favorite of all the movies that he had made. Uh, it's the one that my grandmother genuinely does not like and refuses to watch.
Hmm.
Uh, because the character that John Wayne plays in that movie is a horrid, horrid man. And up until the last about 4 seconds of the movie, he is, or up until the last, couple of minutes of the movie, he is awful. And I'll let you watch it yourself. But basically, the impetus of the movie is that John Wayne is this former Confederate soldier who comes home to I think his brother and his family. So his brother and the brother's wife and 3 children. And while he's away, the sheriff who also or maybe he's the captain of the Texas Rangers who also happens to be the local preacher. uh, asked for his help chasing down either rustlers or renegade Comanche. And I think it's the renegade Comanche. Well, while they're gone, the renegade Comanche, or not the renegade Comanche, but no, yeah, the renegade Comanche. While they're gone, the Comanche attack the farmhouse, and the brother and his wife and son are killed instantly, immediately. And the two daughters are carried off by the Comanche. Well, John Wayne's character, whose name is Ethan, by the way, immediately just goes after them to try to get the girls back. Somewhere along the trail, they come across where the older of the two girls has been killed by the Comanche and just left there. And that's a hard thing to watch because it's that time in film where they didn't show anything gruesome, but knowing that it's there and having to imagine it almost makes your skin crawl even more. But basically, for the rest of the movie, they're trying to go and get the younger girl, who I think is about 7 when the Comanche first take her.
Mm.
And when they find her, it's a few years later, and she's basically completely brainwashed. She is war leader's, one of this war leader's concubines, essentially. She's completely brainwashed. She speaks Comanche. She has her hair in Comanche braids. She's wearing Comanche clothes. And she tries to tell them to leave uh, because they took too long to come and get her. So she just gave herself over to the Comanche and just basically became Comanche. Well, now at this point, for the entire rest of the movie, John Wayne's character has his mind made up that he is just going to kill her because he has this bitter hatred of Indians, and he outright rejects her as being his blood kin, even though she actually is. And the one that wants to help her is the part Indian that isn't even related to them. And he considers her to be basically his little sister because he was raised partially by her parents. But basically, John Wayne completely disowns her and says that the best thing for her would be just to kill her because she's not white anymore and she's not even really Comanche. So we should just kill her.
Hmm.
And the end of the movie is that he has an opportunity to do that, but then doesn't, and he can't bring himself to do it. And then he picks her up and carries her home and brings her back to the neighbors who basically take over from there and finish raising her. And everybody goes inside except him. He turns around and walks back out into the desert because now his job is done and there's nothing left for him to do. And also just this idea that he doesn't belong with them because of who he is and what he does. So that's The Searchers. It's a much better movie than what I described. I gave sort of the synopsis because there's the way that John Ford directs a movie is excellent. It's a way that movies used to be directed a long time ago, but they aren't anymore. Uh, for the most part, is there's an overall plot and then there's a whole bunch of little subplots that happen that are just more like mini stories within the story to keep the overall story going forward. More like where it's an actual scene within a film instead of the entire movie basically just being one long scene
What you've
and these
described is
scenes are
reminiscent
just
of a play.
transition points. What's that?
What you've described is reminiscent of a play.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably the best way to describe it. That John Ford directed all of his films as though they were plays with acts. It was clearly defined an act and a scene. And he's not the only one who had done this. Howard Hawks did this too, which is why Rio Bravo is also on this list. Technically, El Dorado is because it's just Rio Bravo. It's the same story, but a little bit different. But Rio Bravo done more specifically Rio Bravo because I think it's just better told story, better characters, and a better cast. Nothing against Robert Mitchum, but I mean Rio Bravo has Dean Martin, so and you get to hear Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson sing a duet. So just for the appeal of that alone, it sort of gets above El Dorado. And my absolute favorite movie of all time is McClintock. It's not a traditional Western. It's more like The Taming of the Shrew set in the West in late 19th century Colorado. And basically, the entire purpose of the story is for John Wayne's character, George Washington McClintock, to basically regain control of his house and restore his union with his wife, who has been gallivanting around doing wealthy rich woman socialite things that a woman really should not be doing without her husband, like going and dancing at the governor's ball and just going and doing really frivolous things and doing it specifically to irritate him.
Hmm.
Now, the wife is played by Maureen O'Hara, one of the greatest actresses of all of Hollywood history, probably one of the most beautiful women ever to be on screen, period, and probably the single actress that John Wayne had the absolute best chemistry with on screen. So from just a film artistic whatever criticism standpoint, that's where that comes in. But there are there are so many reasons why I think McClintock is the best movie ever that I think we would probably just need an entire episode devoted to specifically that. Basically, my just deconstruction of the film, not deconstruction, dissection of the film, and an explanation for why it's so good. And why I think, in my opinion, it is a movie with almost no flaws, if any at all. And I'll leave it at that because it's too good for me to be able to describe and do justice to, and I wouldn't want to accidentally butcher it
Okay.
in conversation.
It's a worthy list of favorites, I think. I have nothing much to add. I've seen McClintock. I've seen Rio Bravo. I've seen El Dorado. I've seen Gladiator and The Last Samurai. Um, and I guess I can be proud of the fact that my family growing up had El Dorado and Rio Bravo on VHS, and I want to say we had McClintock on VHS somewhere as well. So I am, despite being 27, I could say I'm old enough to have had that experience, and I would like more people to have that experience.
You're properly cultured.
Yay! Perks of being homeschooled. Um, I wish everybody else could have that experience too, and it'd be nice to have a VHS player and to have those on VHS in my own possession.
Yeah, I
Um,
do remember VHS players, and I think my parents still have theirs. So in theory, I could grab it
okay.
from their place and then have a VHS player.
Who knows? If you do it this week, then maybe we can enjoy one of those this weekend when I come down and visit. But
I
we'll
have to
leave
see
that.
what they actually have on VHS.
Fair enough. We'll leave that for later, though. I don't really want to add anything or try and add anything to those films and to your descriptions of them. I'm not qualified to do that. But I guess I'll just pivot to this. In college and post college, I mean, one of the franchises that we've paid the most attention to is the MCU universe. Um, I don't know about how much you paid attention to it recently. I haven't, but at least for a time, like, I mean, it was something we all followed and saw the films for, like many, many other people. And granted, we've said about, well, how would you assess those films? I guess.
Well, so this is going to be my transition from, I suppose, I guess we'll just call them standalone films, uh, for the purposes of having a term for it, even though that's not really what that term means. Into our potential discussion on adaptations and franchises. So
Sure, let's do it.
most everything that I have on the list here is an adaptation. There's a couple of things that are original but are still franchises. So the MCU, again, a big enough topic for an entire conversation in and of itself, or multiple conversations, multiple episodes of the podcast. But I think judging films of the MCU, there are many that are genuinely good films and that are judging, based on the criteria which we have set forth, many that actually are good films. And I think one of the good things that the MCU does is sort of prove my point about, it's not necessarily the director that makes the film. In some ways, it can be, in those cases, in some ways, it is an actor, but not for the purposes, not for the sake of, oh, I'm going to see this movie because Chris Evans is in it. It's, oh, Chris Evans happens to have been cast as Captain America for the duration of this franchise. So I'm going to see Captain America. I'm going to see the character that he's playing, and he is the consistent actor playing this character, even though he did a spectacular job. Like, that's not to say that his performance was not as good as it could have been. It was spectacular. Same thing with Robert Downey Jr. and Iron Man, or with Chris Hemsworth and Thor. Just to briefly say, some of my favorite movies in the MCU, the ones that I genuinely liked, and ones that I actually think are very, very good, are ones that a lot of people think are mid or not great. And a lot of that is sometimes that's coming off of like hardcore comic book nerds that think everything has to be exactly the way that they envision. And I haven't really. The last MCU movie that I went to see in theaters was Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings, which I thought was pretty good. It was at least enjoyable, and there was a good fight. I think that one was kind of ruined by the ending as well, which I'll get to in a second.
Mm-hmm. You're caught up
And
more
it's
than
a
me, though. I
conversation
think
that
the
I've had
last,
with another mutual friend of ours
I think the
about
last one I
why
saw in theaters
these.
was Endgame.
What was the last one you saw in theaters?
Endgame.
Okay, yeah, good place to stop. Shang-Chi's not a terrible movie, but Endgame was a good place to stop. I think to judge the MCU as a whole, there is sort of a suffering from a lack of cohesion. They shouldn't have all been directed by the same director, because that's not possible. The whole thing would have taken 40 years to accomplish what they did in like 10 if they wanted the same director. But I think there was a lack of communication story-wise as far as uh, the kind of things that we wanted done or that were supposed to have been done. And also just Disney being Disney likes to, sit up here and then go, nope, you can't do that, do this instead. Which, interestingly enough, the MCU started under Paramount. And I would be kind of curious to see where it had gone, where it would have gone if Paramount had been allowed to continue owning it. But I think there are many that are good films. There are many that are just really, honestly, trash, garbage films. Some of the ones that are good, Captain America, all three Captain America movies, I think are excellent. The three Iron Man movies, first Iron Man is very good. The other two are pretty good. Now, for the Thor movies, if I was to judge them as movies, and particularly as movies, within the spectrum of the character and the overall story, I think people are going to hate me for this. I think Thor: The Dark World is actually an excellent movie. It is very well done. I think there is excellent character development. It's a much more subtle movie. The action isn't like, it's a little over the top, but it's not excessively over the top. And no, I think it stands on its own 2 feet relatively well, just as a film. I thoroughly enjoy it. Also, just because I like the character of Thor, I like what happens with him. I like what happens with Loki in that movie too. And that's my favorite of just the actual Thor films. Thor Ragnarok, he learns a lesson, and there is technically some good character development that happens there. But Taika Waititi does not take the character of Thor seriously at all. He makes him the butt of the joke as often as he possibly can, and that has a tendency to take away from the actual serious moments of the movie. Is when you know put jokes in at the wrong place or make them far too often. When you're supposed to be making an epic action movie and you wind up making an action comedy instead. But
Okay.
I don't know. That's just sort of my overall opinion of the MCU. I think it was a good thing in general, because I don't know if it's necessarily the first time, but it's the first time to my knowledge that that people actually got together and said, hey, what if we had a whole bunch of movies that are not necessarily linearly connected, but are all related to the same overarching story and all lead into this one big event. And I think that's, with Infinity War and Endgame, if we had them just by themselves, they would be terrible. But with the buildup of all the other movies leading into them, I think they work really, really well. Because it's like if you tried to take the end of a series, if you tried to take the last Stormlight Archive book or the fifth Stormlight Archive book and judge it by itself, which I haven't even read it yet. I need to finish going through the other ones so I can read it properly in sequence. But if you understand what I'm saying,
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. It's been a while since I've seen the films, but I see slash imagine what you mean by
yeah,
if you took Infinity War and Endgame, um, then you put them in a vacuum outside of everything else and just judge them that way. Like it would not, yeah, it wouldn't be the same.
yeah, they would probably fail. But on the backs of all the other movies, they're done very, very well. And I think that they do qualify as good films. Many of them do qualify as good films. And Infinity War and Endgame probably qualify as good films. It's been a while since I've seen them, but from what I do recall, they do qualify as good films from our criterion that we've laid down.
Yeah, fair enough. What would your favorites be if you had to pick? I think if I had to pick mine, I'd have to watch them again because my opinion is not as informed as it otherwise could be. But two I would just list off the top of my head: Captain America: The Winter Soldier, and the first Iron Man movie. And those two are really good.
So I will also say Captain America and the Winter Soldier, as I think that is my absolute favorite MCU film, period. And I think it actually is just the best because it's one that stands as a sequel, as a movie within a sequence related to other movies, as a hook for a third one, and also, or as a hook for later movies, and also as its own movie, just by itself. Because going into it, really the only thing that you absolutely need to know is that they pulled Captain America out of the ice, and he was in love with a girl back in the 40s that's now super old and has Alzheimer's. So those are kind of my reasons for those being for that one being my top favorite. I think Ant-Man is another one that worked really well. Captain America: Civil War, another one of my favorites, purely because of I think people like Civil War and people that side with Captain America are the same people that side with the samurai in the Battle of Shirayama. Is because I might be wrong, but I'm going to stand here and fight for what I think is right anyway.
Yeah, Civil War would be number three probably for me. It's a very good film.
So I would say those two are probably my favorite. Yeah, I'll go with actually MCU movies overall. I would say Captain America and the Winter Soldier. And this is also an unpopular opinion, but I'm probably going to say Avengers Age of Ultron.
Say more, I guess.
So that one, I think, unrightly has the bad reputation of being the worst Avengers movie of the ones that had previously been made. Like between the first one, it itself, Endgame or Infinity War and Endgame. And I've even heard some people say that it is just the worst movie of the MCU, which they were then proven wrong when Captain Marvel came out. And they were like, "Oh no, no, it can be worse." So I always like that when a movie is not that bad, but everybody thinks it's terrible, and a genuinely bad movie comes out, and they're like, "Oh no, it can be worse," or even a movie that's genuinely just blah or meh. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
so I like Age of Ultron because it is one of the movies of the MCU that probably has the highest or the biggest takeaway, because Ultron is created as to protect the Earth, but he is created too well, and he is created using an implement that his creator does not fully understand. There's sort of the lesson in there of against sort of the against progress idea that I have, where with every new technology, we shouldn't just be immediately putting the pedal to the floor and taking it to its absolute limits and just off the cuff doing what we think we should do immediately. And a lot of that is because Scarlet Witch was manipulating Iron Man's fears and playing off of them. But, he's exactly this type of person to do that. Where it's like, nope, we're just going to put the pedal to the floor and we're just going to use this thing, whatever it is, even though we don't really know what it is. I found it inside Loki's magic scepter, and I'm not sure what that is. We don't know what this is or where it came from, but we're going to pattern an artificial intelligence off of it and potentially let it take control of our artificial intelligence, which
A
was a
high
supremely
IQ and
bad
not high
idea.
wisdom play.
Yeah, it was a supremely bad idea from the start, and Banner tries to convince him otherwise, but he is far too weak-willed to be able to stand up to Tony Stark's brashness. So he winds up getting pulled along for the ride too. And they do this without the knowledge of anybody else, because we know if this ever gets brought up, both Captain America and Thor are probably going to be going, no, bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
And probably just everybody there, because everybody else actually has common sense, is probably just going to go, no, 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 this is not a good idea. And Captain America literally just sunk a wreck in the Potomac that illustrates why you shouldn't be creating weapons of mass destruction ostensibly for protection, because if they ultimately they probably wind up falling into the wrong hands. People have objected to Age of Ultron because Ultron makes himself try to seem like a religious figure in parts. He's explaining to the twins that why the church is in the exact center of the city. And when he gets the vibranium, he says, "On this rock I will build my church." And I'm like, yes, but the devil also quotes scripture.
Well, it makes them all the more evil.
Yeah, it's because
So,
he has misquoted scripture. Like the devil does also can quote scripture, so it's like you can have a bad guy quote scripture
mm-hmm.
because the devil does that in scripture, as long as he's then corrected. But I think overall, if I was to give the MCU a percentage rating, just so we can move on from the topic, just like a percentage rating for just quality, and talking about from Iron Man to Endgame, I'd probably give it a solid 76.5%
Okay.
for overall quality, because there's a lot more hits than there are misses, and because of the source material that you're operating off of, there are times when it does something really good for that movies based on source material ought to do, which is do things that fans are expecting to see, and also do things that fans weren't expecting to see and didn't know they wanted until that moment. Because like in Age of Ultron, everybody's trying to see if they're briefly, everybody's trying to see if they're worthy to lift Thor's hammer.
Mm-hmm.
And Captain America puts his hand on it and it moves. And they're like the two ways of interpreting that is he is worthy and he could have lifted it, but he didn't want to break Thor's spirit. He didn't want to make Thor feel bad, so he didn't. Or that he was not quite worthy yet. That he was very close to being worthy, but not quite, which is that's the theory that I have. That's my personal method of interpreting that. Because in some ways, Captain America is still a little bit ideal, and he hasn't quite suffered enough in the right ways to be made into a man that is worthy of carrying that hammer or of lifting that hammer. And then when he lifts it in Endgame, everybody is like, I didn't know I wanted that, but that was awesome.
And it made sense
Which
though.
was basically my reaction. It was uh, much more animated than that, but that was basically my reaction. It was like, I had no idea I wanted this so bad. I had no idea that I wanted Captain America with Thor's powers so bad.
I'm still stuck on how he might not have been worthy yet, because that also begs a question, which is how is Thor worthy to begin with? How has he suffered enough? I know he's like died and all, but then again, Captain America got frozen in the ice. Like, eh, it. He has his Thor has his story in the first Thor movie about how he becomes worthy, and fair enough.
I
But
think it's just
it seems
ultimately
like
his
Captain
willingness
America's
to lay
done
down his
just as good,
life.
just as much, if not more. So, is there a relative scoring for members of or denizens of Asgard versus denizens of Earth? How is this morality scale supposed to work?
Now, this is not something that I have fully fleshed out in my head. That's just the one that sounds better.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I was writing the story, that is what I would have. That's how I would tell it, rather than him actually being worthy the whole time, but he's sparing his friend's feelings
Makes sense.
because that's a little bit. It's a little. It's just a little bit too soft-handed for me, to be honest. It's like I like the no, you're not quite worthy yet.
All right. But Captain America is supposed to be very virtuous. But the
He is.
comments
He
can
is.
discuss this further. Um, I will just, I will merely use this as a segue towards the overall
I'll
morality
also
of
say the
films today.
criteria for being worthy was probably set by Odin.
Okay,
So Odin's standards are probably a little bit different.
fair enough. I leave that to the comments to decide. But to segue from that morality to the morality of films in general, where do you see them succeeding today? Where do you see them falling short? Um, People have different thoughts about violence in movies. People have, well, I guess people have thoughts, but there's just way too much sex in films and gratuitous scenes now. Um,
Yes. So
yeah, give me your thoughts. You're an author, so you have your own unique perspective on this as well. Like I'm just a normal guy. I consume stuff, and I don't think that makes me wrong with my opinions necessarily. But you have an angle on it that I just don't. So,
so usually this shouldn't really be a surprise, but my line for what I tolerate in something is very close to the line for what I will actually write. And I think there are three ways in which a film can go afoul, excessively afoul.
mm-hmm.
And three like major ways that are obvious apart from just having a bad story or a bad message. Uh, because a film can, be fine in these ways, but then still be a crappy film and have a bad message overall. So the big three that everybody looks at is violence, sexual content, and foul language. Placing them in order of how much I am willing to tolerate from the most to the least, I would say violence first, then the foul language, and then the sexual content. And that's foul language, meaning people say shit and the F word a lot. That is not blasphemy. I will not tolerate blasphemy. And if I hear it, and even if I'm watching a movie in which I know it's coming up, and or whatever. I One must offer reparations for that anytime it is heard to make up for it having just been said, even just by a recording.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's the order that I usually put them in: is violence, foul language, and sexual content. There is a surprisingly high amount of violence that I will tolerate. I think where people tend to go wrong when judging or when placing the line for what they can tolerate is, one of two extremes. They either pull it way far back and they're like, "Oh no, there's a knife on screen. This is too violent." Or, "Oh
Okay.
no, there's a little bit of blood. I can't watch this. This is too much." Or way too far in the other direction where they will literally just tolerate anything. And there kind of has to be there's kind of some other caveats in this where if the violence is technically gratuitous, but if it's, the way that the effects are done and the way that it is, just portrayed is just sort of so cartoonishly absurd that I'm able to keep myself separated from it, I can probably tolerate it. Like the example of that being most of the finishers in Mortal Kombat. Most of those I can tolerate because like it's too much technically speaking, but it's also like it's cartoonishly absurd. It verges into absurdity at that point.
No, there's a place for that. The film, although this is the silver screen version, I guess,
Yeah.
is
Well, when
Tom and
it's
Jerry. Like, I don't
yes.
want an
Well,
actual cat on screen to, get turned into a flat surface. But I'm more than happy to view that in Tom and
well, there are
Jerry and
even
laugh
ways
at
that
it.
you can do that with technically a live action cat and technically a live action movie where that's still humorous and funny, and you can,
Well, sure.
do cartoonish things in live action. But
Yeah,
where
I'm sure there's a way.
it's if it's to an absurd degree where it's like, yeah, this is like the one that comes to mind is the Mortal Kombat movie because I actually don't think that's too far. A lot of people do. Um, and that's the most recent one, which I think is from like 2018 or it might be from 2020, maybe. No, I enjoyed it. I thought it wasn't bad.
Fair enough. I have not seen it as many things, so once again, my opinion
And
is
it's
moot.
a lot of deaths happen via the finishers that are in the games. So, and
Somebody
a
gets
lot
their
of them
spine
are,
ripped out or something.
yeah, it's stuff like that. Or Liu Kang's, I think Liu Kang is the guy with the razor blade hat. Uh, like he has one finisher where I think it's a finisher that's specific to another character that flies, where he has the hat stuck in the ground and it's spinning like a buzzsaw, and he basically grabs her by the neck and runs her through it like he's like he's
Oof.
cutting her on a table saw. I'm like, okay, that was pretty. And she's basically a demon anyway, so I'm like, yeah, okay, that's pretty sick.
Hmm.
So yeah, to that extent, it's like, okay, I'm willing to tolerate kind of extreme violence, particularly if it's being done. It's like with like Doom, like the violence is being done to demonic entities. So it's like,
To a degree, all bets are off.
yes, to a degree, most bets are off at that point.
Yeah.
But if we're seeing, my wife likes to say that her line with violence is torture in film, and she actually means that in a much broader sense because she can watch The Passion of the Christ, which, by the way, is actually a little bit past my line, but I still think it should be watched because
It's its own special case.
it's its own special case because people need to see what our Lord went through. They need to see the last extremes of human suffering and human cruelty. So, again, it gets put in a category on its own. If you want to technically cross that line of violence, of what is being done being really, really, really horribly violent, they used to be really good about this in in older movies. Like the way they would do it, they'd actually have the camera from the perspective, say somebody's been killed in a particularly brutal way. They'd actually have the camera from the perspective of the person that's been killed, and then whoever is coming upon that person
You
comes
see their
into the
reaction.
shot and then reacts,
Hmm.
which is also a greater testament to acting. But a lot of that has to do with the fact that Hollywood had a code at the time beyond what we have now, which is just the ratings from the Motion Picture Association. So, which sets standards that you have to and parameters and criteria for what spectrum to be in if you want this to be a PG-13 or a PG or G or R.
Mm-hmm.
And unrated being like, okay, that this is just so bad that we're not even going to try. There was a code that was originally put in place because most of the movies that were made in the 1920s were just obscene. It was either pornography or it was just bad.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, the code is put in place. I think it's put in place in the mid to late 30s or the early 40s, and it is observed until the early 60s. And this is for both film and television. Television is a little bit different, but it winds up it observes the same code when it comes about, or it tries to for serialized uh, television series. So basically, there were things in this code that you were and were not allowed to do when you made a movie, or it could not be produced in Hollywood. It was basically
Okay.
like a law. Eventually, it collapsed for a couple of reasons. One of which is they just kind of stopped enforcing it, and they started to allow little exceptions to happen, and in some cases, most of the time, when you start allowing exception after exception after exception, they just wind up building up, and then you wind up having trash again.
Mm-hmm.
So until ultimately the code is abolished, I think the code is just officially abolished. I think in the late '60s, and that's part of the reason why there were almost no good films made in the '70s and '80s, because with no more code to even like begrudgingly or technically follow, now we can just do whatever we please in movies. And when people are allowed to do whatever they please, they wind up producing filth.
What are
Basically,
the
they
contents
follow
of
their
this
own
code?
devices, they wind up producing filth. There are, of course, exceptions, but when the ratings commission shows up, and I think that's somewhere in the 90s, then the ratings commission shows up and they're like, all right, we're going to put the brakes on this now. I think we've had enough. And then now there's actually, and they put some kind of order to movies then again,
Fair enough. What were the
which
contents
really
of this
just
code?
sort of it created a code without creating a code, because you start putting ratings on movies for who the ratings commission is like suggests is should be allowed to see this. There's if it's R rated, nobody under the age of 17, or specifically NC 17, which is like the next step above R before you get to unrated, which is one that not a lot of movies are given these days. It's just like R most of the time. And PG-13, which is like if you're a teenager, okay. And then PG, which is older kids. Parents should probably just be aware. And then G, which is like, just trust me, this movie's fine.
I meant what are the
Fine
contents
for,
of the old code? Like what were they policing for back in the day?
I don't actually know what the criteria are. And I don't know that it's necessarily based on the old code, but it kind of winds up going back to that, because when you start doing that, the audience starts paying attention to the rating of the film. And then, you know, people start going, well, there's no point in me making the X-rated movies anymore.
Hmm.
Also, because a lot of theaters just finally went, you know what, we're not going to show this anymore. And local ordinances and I think state and federal laws started stepping in again. Um, I do have my criticisms of the original code. I understand why they were in place, but I think a lot of places it was way too strict. Because when you're dealing with people, you have to understand the fallenness of the human race, but without assuming that everybody is just evil completely and totally on the inside. Like, I know one of the rules of the old code was that in a movie, a husband and wife were not allowed to be depicted in the same bed. Like, their bedroom was not permitted to have a bed that was big enough for two people,
Okay.
even if they were never even in the bed. The only time anybody ever got away with this was in that I know of was in I Love Lucy in the first full season of it, but that's because Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz at the time were actually married. But even then, it's two separate beds, two separate mattresses that are pushed together. And then in a later season, I guess somebody stepped in and said, "Nope, nope, can't show that. Too intimate." So we're going to put an end table in between them.
Which is funny because both of us can rant against, sexual impurity in multiple forms in modern film and TV, and yet, yeah, that's just prudishness.
That's prudishness, and it's absurd.
Yeah.
Because it's this idea, it's based on this thought that, oh, you know, people know what husbands and wives do in their bedroom. So, if you show a queen size bed, ooh, or if you show a bedroom that is occupied by a husband and wife, and it's obvious that they sleep in the same bed, ooh, that's horrible. Can't have that. Because people's minds are always going to just immediately go to sex after that, apparently.
Not if they're well
When
enough
even at the
formed.
time, most people, husbands and wives share a bed. You sleep in the same bed.
Mm-hmm.
For one thing, it's warmer. Easier to stay warm in the wintertime when you share a bed with somebody else. For another thing, I'm never sleeping in a twin bed again because I have a wife. I'm going to share my bed with my wife. That's what you do when you're married. Because it's just proper and right. That is a rule that was probably made up by either a Protestant or a Catholic who thinks like a Protestant, thinking that sex is a necessary evil for the survival of civilization.
Yeah. It's kind of where my brain went to, was just like, I mean, sex is not a bad thing to think about. It can
Yeah.
be, but it's, if you're well enough formed, it's kind of obvious, or hopefully it's obvious as to when it's getting there. So don't do that. But yeah, people have sex. Married couples have sex. It's part of life. It's how you showed up, and it's a holy and thing. So yeah,
Yeah.
to just
So,
further say what you're already saying, because again, I have nothing
well,
original to contribute. This is your realm.
so I've stated my opinion on like the violence that I'm willing to tolerate, and so at this point we've transitioned into uh, the limits on sexual content. That should be kind of obvious, even between married people. I don't really want to see something on screen that should not be done before you're married.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know that that's also a very broad statement because there are people that think that you shouldn't look at a woman below her eye level before you're married. Again, also absurdity and prudishness. There's nothing wrong with admiring a woman's figure. Nothing wrong with admiring that she has a nice figure, even if she's not wearing that many clothes. Because you have to see that now in public. It's just otherwise you just have to completely gouge out both of your eyes and go through the rest of your life blind. I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
do that because I like to look at my wife.
The purpose of custody of the eyes is not because she has a beautiful figure. It's for other reasons. So those
And
other
it's
reasons
not
dictate
so
the
much
line.
custody of the eyes as it is custody of the mind and the heart. Custody of the mind and the heart and thoughts. Like Father Larry Richards usually has said that The advice that he gives to teenage boys is, if you're walking down the walking along the beach and you pass by this girl and she's really cute. She's got cute face and the nice hair. She's got a nice figure. She's got the nice swimsuit. The right response should be, God does really great work. And then just to go, you do great work, God, keep it up. You made her beautiful. Keep making them beautiful. And that just is the proper reaction. So, but as far as like what I'm willing to tolerate in films, there are things that could be considered like technically sexual content that I'm willing to tolerate. Like the way that a woman is dressed in a movie applies, the same rule kind of applies because I have no control over that. And like there are times when definitely, yes, you should look away. Definitely look away. But there are also times when it's kind of like the same reaction to when you just sort of run into the girl on the beach.
I mean, really, that just gets into a conversation about modesty. And I think
Yeah,
it's
we'll have
pretty
my wife on when we talk about that.
fair enough. But without getting into where the lines are for that, which, yeah, can be saved for another time, I think you can make a pretty easy argument that just immodesty shouldn't be in films, period. Because you shouldn't put
No,
that.
you could say that it shouldn't be, but I'm making an argument for like what to do when it inevitably is.
Oh, sure. Yeah, then, like you
Because
said, the exact same rule applies.
how often do
So,
you come across a man that always does what he should or what he ought?
mhm.
Never. There is no man besides our Lord and probably Saint Joseph to have ever been born that has always, under every circumstance, done what he ought.
Yep. If you're looking for us to be a role model, we ain't going to work. But we can point you to them and say, do that. So,
So, but as far as the sexual content, I'm not going to react the way that like Protestants do when it's like, oh my gosh, they're holding hands. Oh my gosh, they kissed. There are certain kinds of kissing where it's like, yeah, we probably let's not watch that because it's a slobbery movie kiss that's like, no, I don't want to. I don't need to see anybody's tongue. Thank you very much. That's no.
mhm.
When a certain level of intimate touching, which usually is, when a man touches a woman below the waist, and that's sides and back, below the neck if it's the front, for any reason other than to like pull her out of a burning building or like Superman catching the woman that's falling. But I think we all know that. I think at this point, there's enough films out there that are definitely past the line. People know when that sort of intimacy is going to happen. You can just kind of feel it when you're watching the movie,
Mhm.
which is kind of creepy with how that works because it's not necessarily even obvious. It's just like, I'm getting uncomfortable now. I think this is very shortly going to go someplace where I think I'm going to have to skip forward a couple of minutes.
Yep.
But yeah, basically, don't put anything on screen that shouldn't be between. Okay, why don't I put it this way? Don't go looking for anything in a movie that you wouldn't want to walk in on your parents doing.
I see the point of that. Yeah, I
I
see the
think we'll
point of
make
that.
that the line because there's like there's the teenage reaction to just the you see your parents kissing and you're like, ew, or dad makes a comment about mom and it's like, oh dad, ew, no, stop it.
Let's.
But that's all perfectly fine. Like if a kid walks in on his parents while they're in the process of making his a younger sibling,
We all
that's
know. We all know a line's been crossed.
that
Yeah,
never happened to me, but I'm told that that's traumatizing.
fair enough.
And there's also like levels of intimacy that my wife and I probably aren't going to show. We're not going to get to that level when our kids are around.
Can't confirm. Never want to. So,
But yeah, I would say that that's probably the line for sexual content is just I don't want to see anybody doing on screen something that I'm not okay with seeing my parents doing, even though it's perfectly reasonable within their marriage.
Yeah,
But
like you
that's
said,
like
that seems like a reasonable line to me. So
so usually kissing is fine, holding hands is fine. Yeah, to an extent, a little bit of touching is fine. But it's like if you imagine yourself as a teenager walking into the kitchen and your mom and dad are in there and you're like, nope, just gonna do a little U-turn. Not to the point of making a younger sibling, but it's still like I don't want to see that.
mm-hmm.
That's the line.
Fair enough. As we close, then, yeah. What are the if you had to give people three things to take away from this across the whole spectrum of things we've talked about, what would they be?
Well, film. So first off, film is a medium and a tool, and it's something that ought to be used to create art and to produce art, and not garbage or pornography. There ought to be a clearly defined moral line, and it should be in the right place because a lot of times a lot of issues come about when you don't put the moral line in the right place, when it's either not far enough or way too far, which is what Protestants tend to do. And usually, when people rebel against the moral line, when they break it, they're breaking the one that is way too far ahead. But because that's the only one that was set for them, one of two things happens. Either that's the only one that was set for them, so they break it, realizing the thing that's just beyond it isn't that bad, so then they go, oh, all of the rest of this is okay, and then they just completely fall off the deep end. They just dive completely into the abyss. Or they come and they meet another line, and at that point, one of two things happens. Either they go, oh, that's where the line actually is. Oh, okay, I understand now. That makes a lot more sense. Or they now have a taste for rebellion. They like the high that they got from breaking that last line, so they're going to break this one too. And those are usually the people that don't have, that wind up not having a line to begin with. Or they wind up just not having any line at all because they have broken every single one and they didn't stop at the correct one. And lastly, most of the movies that we've talked about have been like technically action, adventure, epics, but that's because that's I'd say that's probably just our opinions of the kinds of movies that we really like.
Yeah, we're
Those
two
are
guys
usually
in
the
our
best
20s.
kinds
What do
of
you expect us to talk about?
well, they're usually the best kinds of movies for men, anyway. Um, but there's no one genre that is necessarily superior to another, like by the pure merits of the genre of film. And if you prefer horror, that's okay. I don't want to go into a movie wanting to be scared. If you prefer rom coms, that's okay. Just don't subject your boyfriend to too many of them. And if you're male and prefer rom coms, I won't ask you, don't tell.
How about this? Drink a Cosmo and never talk to me again.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So film ought to be used to produce art and not garbage. There should be a clearly defined moral line, and it should be in the right place. And it is okay to have types of preferences as long as your preferences themselves are not immoral.
Yep, those seem like good points to me. So now I'll have to go watch McClintock or Rio Bravo or El Dorado again, I guess. So, but yeah, as you all should.
Everybody should go and watch the movies that we've talked about, other movies that we haven't, because believe me, there's a lot more that wound up in my list here that we didn't talk about, and other things that could probably wind up just being conversations in and of themselves, and probably will be.
For anybody that's interested, if you're still listening, we will put that list in the comments. So, or a link to it in the comments. So you can view the full list of what we could have talked about.
What we could have talked about and forgot to. Yeah, we'll put that in either the pinned comment or the description.
Yep. But you have to go watch McClintock.
Yes, you must. Everyone should. And that is non negotiable. That is a hard and fast rule. And I will also say this. This was my brother's 4 years older than me, and this was kind of the thing that he did when he was dating, when he would date a girl, to figure out what kind of girl that she was, or whether or not he would bother dating her further. Within the first 3 dates, he watched McClintock with her. I remember one girl he dated, it was McClintock. I think with his wife, I think it was The Quiet Man, because that's a similar kind of point being made. But that is going to be my family's movie, and anyone who wants to enter into my family has to be subjected to it. And you will be judged based on your reaction to that movie. It may seem silly to some people, but go watch the movie and you'll understand why. If it repulses you, I want nothing to do with you. If you like it, you and I are kindred spirits.
Fair enough. Well, y'all have your homework. And with that, we bid you all a good evening.